Hello friends. This is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto found Haku, allied with Mikoto, and revived the Uzumaki legacy? Episode 2. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, Naruto's growing power has begun attracting dangerous enemies. As Haku and Mikoto stand beside him, the next step toward rebuilding the Uzumaki legacy begins. Now, let's start. In Konoha, just after Naruto's outburst. After they all heard Naruto's bedroom door slam shut, Minato and Kushina turned their attention to their daughter to find out if she was alright. What they saw when they got close shocked them to the core. There was Naomi, gasping and panting in agony, favoring the ribs on her right side, while blood ran freely down her face from her nose and mouth. The right side of her jaw had swollen to more than 3 times its normal size, and was discolored blood red and dark purple. Her right eye was also beginning to shut at the bottom from the swelling on her jaw and cheek. Naomi. Kushina cried out in shock and fear for her daughter's health as she ran over to her and knelt down to cradle her. Minato called out, "Tsunade. We need your help over here." Tsunade ran over and gasped upon seeing Naomi's condition. She immediately began making hand signs before green chakra started to envelop her right hand. Running her hand over Naomi's face and body, she turned to Minato and Kushina. "We need to get her to the hospital. Now," she ordered. Minato and Kushina didn't think twice. Minato picked up his daughter and both parents immediately made their way to the hospital, intent on getting their daughter the medical attention she needed. Once Tsunade and her staff had finished patching Naomi up, Minato and Kushina bade her goodnight and left the hospital to return home, both of them furious with Naruto for hurting her so badly. Naruto had broken her jaw, fractured her cheekbone, and left her with 4 broken ribs. Once they returned home, they sat in the living room for hours waiting for Naruto, only leaving to check his room to see if he had snuck back in through his window. When 2 o'clock the next morning rolled around, both of them decided to call it a night. They would make sure that Naruto received the beating of his life for what he did to his sister. Upon waking up that morning, both of them scoured the house, but had found no signs of Naruto. He hadn't come back home last night. Their first thoughts were that he was putting off the punishment that he knew was coming, which would only make his punishment that much worse. Minato went into the office while Kushina left to spend some time with her daughter, but not before making a shadow clone to wait for Naruto at home. 8 hours after she had left the house, Kushina had finally returned home, only to see her shadow clone still there waiting. Her clone looked at her and shook her head in the negative before dispelling. Naruto still hadn't come back home. She went through her nightly routine as Minato came back to the house making dinner and preparing for bed. Both Minato and Kushina each created a shadow clone to wait up all night. They were not going to miss Naruto's return home, and he was not going to get away with what he'd done. The second day proceeded much the same way that the previous day had, with Naruto still not returning home. Upon seeing that Naruto still had not returned home by the morning of the 3rd day, Kushina's anger turned to worry. Where was he? What would keep him away from his home for 3 full days? Granted, it wasn't supposed to be his home that much longer, but he certainly didn't know that, did he? And even if he did, Kushina would at least make sure this wouldn't come to be. As much of a bad apple as he was still her son. And she'd be damned if she would let him be thrown out into the cold. "Minato," she said to her husband that morning before he left for the office, "I'm starting to get worried." "Worried? Why? What do you mean, why? Our son hasn't been home in 3 days. Minato looked at her in confusion before giving her a dismissive, carefree smirk. "It's probably just as well. This isn't his home anymore. Anyway, you know that." What's that supposed to mean? She snapped back indignantly. He may not be our heir anymore, but he's still our son, and I won't allow him to be thrown out of this house. Minato just laughed before flashing away, leaving Kushina with a bewildered expression and a bad feeling in her gut. She decided to create 2 shadow clones today, one to visit Naomi and the other to wait for Naruto to hopefully return to the house. She would spend the day trying to find her son in the hope that something terrible hadn't happened. Mikoto Uchiha was a nervous wreck. She had been wandering around frantically asking any of the people that Naruto was on good terms with if they had seen him. She had gone to the Ichirakus and talked to both of them, though they hadn't seen him, either. Tsuki and Ayame were just as worried as Mikoto was. Naruto ate lunch there every single day without fail, and something horrible must have happened for him not to show up there. Naruto had also won over all of Tsuki's regular lunchtime patrons with his kind and friendly ways. Even those who had hated him at first couldn't help but warm up to him once they had gotten to know him. They were just as worried as Mikoto and the Ichirakus, knowing that Naruto's absence from the stand was a very bad sign. When they even closed up shop for a few days in an effort to help Mikoto look for the boy, his customers also lent what aid they could to help find him. Unfortunately, all of their efforts were for naught. After 4 days of searching, Mikoto knew that if Naruto wanted to be found, he would have been by now. He had left the village. And it was all those damn Namikaze's faults. Kushina was now beyond worried. She was frantic and terrified. It had been 2 full days since she'd started actively searching not only the village, but the surrounding areas in an effort to find her missing son. She became even more frantic when she started to see just how little she had thought about him before all of this happened. Last night, as she was preparing dinner, she prepared her usual 3 places at the table, only to realize that Naomi was still in the hospital, so she removed one of them. Thoughts of Naomi led her to thoughts on how she ended up in the hospital, which led her thoughts to Naruto. Why hadn't she prepared a place for him at the dinner table? Recounting as many times as she could have when she had set the table, she always saw only 3 places there. When was the last time she had prepared Naruto a meal? This realization had prompted her to drop what she was doing and head back out for another round of searching right then and there. She didn't even bother creating a clone to visit Naomi or wait at the house for the next day. She hadn't spoken to Minato since then, and she hadn't spent the night at home, either, opting to search through the night and well into the morning in the hopes of finding Naruto. The sun was currently approaching its high noonday position. As she leapt through the trees, so many questions plagued her mind. Where could he have gone? Was he all right, or did something happen to him? Was he lying hurt or dead somewhere? These questions had prompted her to reflect on her relationship with him. When she thought back, she realized that she couldn't recall any moments or times that would show the two of them as having any kind of relationship with each other. At least, none to speak of. Was there a time where she spoke to him where she wasn't angry about something? She then started to recall all of the trouble she saw him getting into, only to realize that she had never actually seen any of it. All she had to go on concerning Naruto's troublemaking ways was hearsay. When did she ever ask Naruto's accusers to prove what had happened? And what about when she got Naruto's side of the story? She stopped dead in her tracks as she gasped loudly. When had she ever gotten his side of the story? Come to think of it, whenever she saw him, he never caused any trouble. In fact, any time Naomi taunted him at home, he usually ignored her or got up and walked away. In fact, what he did to Naomi on their birthday was completely unlike anything she'd ever seen him do before. He didn't cause trouble at home, he was usually doing things like, what, exactly? She realized that she didn't know what he did. She didn't even know what he liked to do. In fact, the only people that she knew really cared for her son were Mikoto Uchiha and the Ichirakus. And she only knew that because she saw how they responded to the announcement of Naomi's being named heir to the clan. Who were his friends? Did he even have any? Naruto, when I find you, I promise you I'm going to be a better mother to you from now on. Please, just be okay, she thought to herself, hoping that Naruto might by some miracle sense her sentiment. Wait a minute, Ichirakus. If there was one thing she did know about her son, it was that Naruto loved their food. Maybe they've seen him. She began to feel a glimmer of hope as she sped back to the village intent on getting to the ramen stand. Upon returning to the village, she made her way to the ramen stand, only to see the metal gates pulled down with a sign posted saying, "Closed until Monday." Why? Why did Tuki close up shop? That wasn't like him. He loved his job, and the only reasons she could think of for him to ever close up shop would be that he was on his deathbed or in the hospital, or if Ayame was sick or missing. Missing. Was he also searching for Naruto? He hadn't even come here. Kushina began to hyperventilate as terror-stricken panic seemed to seize her. She collapsed to her knees and put her hand to her chest in an effort to calm herself. As she closed her eyes, she worked as hard as she could to calm herself down. She took deliberate, painstakingly slow breaths. She thought of happy times, happy places. She made a concerted last-ditch effort to calm herself down by imagining all of the happy times that she would have, and the happy memories that she would create with Naruto as soon as she found him and brought him home. Sensing herself growing calmer and relaxing, she slowly stood up and worked to get her bearings. Looking around, she saw that many of the passers-by had stopped and were looking at her in concern. "I'm fine, everyone," she reassured them all, prompting them all to go on their way, before she called out and stopped them all, "Wait a moment." As they stopped and turned to her, she asked them all with genuine concern, "I don't suppose any of you have seen my son in the last few days, have you?" They all responded in the negative, though some did it with a sneer or a derogatory comment about how they hadn't seen the worthless demon trash, or other such insults. Such comments caused Kushina to release some killing intent unconsciously, making everyone move along rather quickly. Well, who else can I talk to that might know something? She thought to herself once more as she went through the people she knew in her mind. It suddenly hit her, Mikoto. But that idea went just as quickly as it came. No. She just lost her entire clan except for her son. She has enough to worry about right now. I should leave her alone. But I'm running out of options. What should I do? I can't think of anyone else. And Ichiraku's doesn't open again for 3 more days. She moved on, choosing to continue searching on her own until the ramen stand opened back up. 8 days. It had been 8 days since the twins' birthday, and there was still no sign of Naruto anywhere. Minato had told her to give up, as Naruto wasn't their problem anymore. He had learned the hard way that this was the wrong thing to say to the frantic mother. Kushina had almost gone feral when Minato had told her to give up on finding the failure, catching him completely off guard, throwing him to the ground and kicking him where it would hurt the most, his jewels. She had relentlessly assaulted his groin before attacking his face and beating him black, blue and bloody. Only when the Anbu had showed up when Minato flared his chakra had Kushina been restrained and the Hokage brought to the hospital to receive medical attention. The injuries to his face weren't serious, he would heal from those without even scarring. But his manhood was another matter. Minato didn't even want to know the extent of the damage to his goods, but he walked out of the hospital with the knowledge that he would never father children ever again. That had angered him, but this was his wife. He loved her, and he had kept things from her. He thought that maybe what she'd done to him was fair, and that maybe she'd call it even after being so upset from what Minato had persuaded her to do in endorsing his plan of naming Naomi their heir. Naomi was still in the hospital undergoing observation. Minato would be coming out of the hospital today, no doubt expecting an apology from her for his injuries. Kushina chuckled bitterly at the idea. There was no way in hell that she would give him one. What she did to him, he had come. And if he didn't change his ways quickly, she might just leave him and move out. That way, she could give Naruto a new home without fear of Minato and Naomi making things hard for him. Ichiraku Ramen came into her sight, and to her relief, the stand was open. She ran to the stand and pulled the flap open, allowing her entry. She looked around, seeing several people eating several variations of Chuki's delectable noodles. Her eyes stopped as they focused on a head of flowing black hair. Mikoto, she called out, running up to the bar next to her friend and taking the empty seat to her right. You, she responded coldly when she caught sight of Kushina. What do you want? Kushina was unnerved at the coldness in Mikoto's expression, as well as the disgust in her voice. Finding her courage, Kushina replied, Mikoto, listen, I'm so sorry about your clan and family. I know that you're going through a difficult time right now, but you think my feelings towards you have anything to do with my grieving over my... Mikoto began incredulously, interrupting Kushina before being interrupted herself. Mikoto, have you seen my son since his birthday? Mikoto's eyes went wide in shock. She couldn't believe the audacity of this woman who threw her son out of her home and family without even so much as a guilty look. But on the other hand, she could hear the desperation in Kushina's question. Upon looking more closely at Kushina, it was easy to see the dark circles under her eyes, and that her skin was paler than usual. She was exhausted and frightened. She hadn't slept well in days. She also looked thinner, indicating that she wasn't eating right, either. Mikoto's flabbergasted gape softened into a confused frown. Why do you even care? It's not like you ever cared before. Kushina's desperation caused her to yell at the woman. Look, I don't know what you think of me at the moment, and to be honest, that doesn't matter right now. I have no idea where my son is, and I've been running myself ragged trying to find him. Do you know where he is or not? Mikoto yelled back. You've already made it public knowledge that you don't want to concern yourself with him anymore. You kicked him out of your family and out of your home. No, I didn't kick him out of my home, and I'm not going to. He may have stopped being our heir, but that doesn't change the fact that he's my son. I know what's usually done when a living heir is removed, but I'm not going to let that happen to him. She yelled back, prompting Mikoto to stand and drum Kushina across the face with her open right hand, sending her out of her seat and sprawling to the floor. While this was happening, murmurs could be heard from the other patrons. Kushina was rather surprised to hear some of the questions being asked. The Hokage and his wife kicked Naruto out. Why would they do that to a great kid like Naruto? How could the Hokage do that to his son and then preach about how the village is like a family? Shocked, are you? Mikoto shouted at the top of her lungs, now enraged at Kushina. That was how Naruto felt when you slapped him. And don't you dare try to insult my intelligence by telling me that you intend to keep Naruto at home after you've banished him from your clan and family. You know full well that when an heir is banished from a clan, that you no longer have any legal right to provide them with shelter. What? Kushina breathed out, in shock at this revelation as tears began to escape her eyes. No, I didn't know. No, that can't be. What the hell's going on out there? Chuki could be heard yelling from the back as he came running up to the front of the store so he could see what all the commotion was about. Ayame was hot on his heels. Kushina leapt to her feet, forgetting about Mikoto's slap, and called out in a tear-filled yell, "Tsuki! Kushina!" he exclaimed, surprised at her appearance. Despite the fact that he didn't want her in his stand, "You have a..." Kushina immediately interrupted him, tears of frightened desperation flowing freely down her face. "Tsuki, please. I need to know if you know anything at all about where my son is. I've been searching for him for 6 days, and I haven't slept at all in the last 3. I've searched the village high and low, and I've also searched every square inch in a 30-mile radius. Please, if you know anything, tell me where he is." She broke down into sobs and collapsed to her knees. Neither Mikoto nor Tsuki could remain angry at the pathetic sight before them. Ayame, however, was a different story. "If you haven't found him by now, you're never going to," she yelled, prompting Kushina to open her eyes and bring her head up to look at the girl, though she didn't stop sobbing. Ayame continued, "The only thing we can say for sure is that he's left the village. If he doesn't want to be found, he's not going to be. And I'm sure that you and that..." Ayame gritted her teeth. "Monsters that you're married to are the last people he wants to be found by. Get out of our stand. You and your family aren't welcome here anymore." Kushina winced and cried even harder at Ayame's cruel words. Ayame simply turned on her heel and ran into the back, crying herself. She looked at Tsuki and Mikoto with a pleading look in her eyes. The two of them looked conflicted in their feelings. On the one hand, they'd seen the callousness with which she could treat her son, but on the other hand, they'd never seen her this concerned or this frantic over anyone before, not even Naomi. "Please," Kushina pleaded more quietly, "I know you're both angry with me, and you have every right to be. I know that up to now, I've failed Naruto as a mother. Since I've been searching, I've had nothing but time to think about things. As I said, I haven't slept. I've been eating erratically. She began to wobble unsteadily before her eyes rolled into the back of her head and she collapsed. Mikoto, thankfully, was able to move fast enough to catch her. She looked at Tsuki, who looked bewildered, not knowing what to think about this whole scenario. Mikoto put a hand to Kushina's forehead and snapped her gaze to Tsuki. "She's burning up." Mikoto reached out with her chakra to see if she could get a read on Kushina's condition, and her chakra's almost depleted. "I don't think she was kidding when she said she hasn't been sleeping or eating." "Ayame," Tsuki called to his daughter, who came back out after a few seconds. It was clear that she'd been crying, but she immediately stopped when she saw a passed-out Kushina being held up by Mikoto. Tsuki instructed his daughter, "I need you to handle things here for a while. We need to get Kushina to the hospital." Ayame just nodded dumbly as Tsuki took Kushina from Mikoto's arms while she flared her chakra brilliantly so that an Anbu could respond and find them. When a hawk-masked Anbu came, he saw Kushina's condition. Without even needing to be told what to do, he grabbed the woman, said one word, "Hospital," to Mikoto and Tsuki, who both nodded, and used Shunshin to take Kushina to the hospital. Mikoto placed a hand on Tsuki and used Shunshin herself to get the two of them there faster. On the street just outside the ramen stand, one Asuma Sarutobi was just returning from a mission, and just happened to overhear the conversation that took place inside the ramen stand. He didn't like what he heard at all, and decided that his report could wait. He could use a meal, and it sounded like the ramen stand would also be the best place to get some answers. Kushina had been admitted to Konoha Hospital for chakra depletion, sleep deprivation and dehydration. She really hadn't been taking care of her most basic needs in her preoccupation towards finding her son. Neither Tsuki nor Mikoto had any idea what to make of this. Was it possible that Kushina really didn't know that it was against the law in Konoha to allow a disowned clan heir to live on clan property? They had been waiting for 2 hours in the hospital's main lobby, waiting to hear about Kushina's condition. As they were waiting, they saw Minato making his way through the main lobby on his way out. He looked terrible. His face was bruised and discolored black, blue and dark purple, and he waddled from side to side, grimacing with each step, as though walking was extremely painful for him. When had he been admitted to the hospital, and why? Both of them looked at the man with loathing and utter disgust. Minato caught sight of the two and waved at them with a friendly smile. As he made his way over to them, Mikoto's face morphed into a furious grimace as she marched right up to him and slapped him hard across the face, right before spitting in it, shocking not only the Hokage, but every onlooker in the room. "What was that all about, Mikoto?" he asked, stunned to near silence by her shocking actions. "You know what that was about, you evil monster." Mikoto screamed at him, causing him to recoil in further surprise while murmurs could be heard all around. "That was for kicking your son out of your family so heartlessly." Again, the rumors could be heard. What did the Hokage do to his son? But he's always talking about how the village is a family. Would he really do something like that? If he did that to his own son, what would he do to the rest of us if it suited him? Minato started feeling apprehensive at the comments going around. He turned to Mikoto and told her discreetly, "Can we talk about this more at another time, and in an area that's not so public?" "Oh, you'd like that, wouldn't you?" Mikoto yelled back. "What's wrong? Too much of a coward to take responsibility for your actions." "Huh. This is neither the time nor the place, Mikoto." Minato growled back through gritted teeth. "And why is?" Mikoto began anew, only to stop when Chuki put a hand on her shoulder. He gave her an understanding glance, at which she turned around and walked off, returning to her seat. "Thanks, Chuki," Minato expressed. Chuki's response was to face the Hokage with a grim expression. "From this day forward, you and your family are no longer welcome in my establishment. Don't ever show your faces again." "Chuki, come on," Minato objected. "No, not after what you did to your son. Unlike you, we love Naruto, and his persecutors are our enemies, too." Chuki also returned to his seat after having said what he needed to say. Minato again looked around and caught a few additional murmurs that everyone else in the lobby was uttering out. "It looks like our Hokage isn't who he claims to be. How could he and his family be so hypocritical? What's the big deal? So he threw the demon out of his family." That last comment made Mikoto snap. She charged at the man who said it, enraged, and proceeded to pound him senseless. It took a couple of Anbu and several orderlies to remove Mikoto from the man and restrain her while they took him back for immediate treatment. Most of them remarked at the irony of the situation. A man actually got injured and severely beaten at the hospital. Mikoto didn't know what his condition was. She frankly didn't care. Minato left the hospital to the Anbu that was outside waiting for him so that he could get to his office. On his way out, however, he couldn't help but ponder what had happened. He never anticipated such a backlash for kicking the failure out of his house. He didn't realize that there were so many people in the village that actually liked the boy, despite his own efforts. If this keeps up, he might be dealing with riots, and possibly even civil war, depending on how this whole situation might escalate. He was no fool. He knew how quickly word spread in his village, and if the people's responses in the hospital were any indicator, then rough times were indeed ahead. His future as Hokage was starting to look a little more uncertain. He needed to start planning to keep his village under control. Naomi was the child of prophecy, so setting her aside for her failure of a brother was not an option that he was even going to entertain. He would not allow Naruto back into the family, and he would not acknowledge that he did anything wrong. But if he didn't do that, then what would happen? There was no point in thinking about that right now. He needed to get back to work. He could use his power as Hokage to contain this situation, and for now, that would have to do. Roughly an hour later, Shizune came into the lobby and called for Mikoto and Chuki. Both of them responded immediately and went to her. Kushina is going to be fine. We're rehydrating her and feeding her intravenously, and she's currently asleep in the recovery ward, she explained to the two of them. Thank you, Shizune. When will she be able to receive visitors? Mikoto asked, relieved that Kushina would be okay. Well, my guess is that she'll be out for at least the next several hours. You're welcome to wait in her room until she wakes up. It's room 247 just down this hallway. We'd like that, Chuki answered before adding. Oh, and we saw the Hokage coming out of the lobby. He looked pretty banged up. Can you tell us anything about that? Shizune pursed her lips together before asking the two of them to follow her into an empty room. Once they were in there, she closed the door and explained what she knew. That Minato told her to give up on finding the failure because he wasn't their problem anymore. That Kushina had attacked Minato in a rage, and sterilized him through brute force. Both Mikoto and Chuki were beyond shocked at this. Maybe Kushina's intentions towards her son were good, after all. They both thanked Shizune for telling them and gave her their word that they wouldn't breathe a word of the conversation to anyone. It wouldn't do for Shizune to be barred from practicing medicine because she broke doctor-patient confidentiality, after all. The pair of them made their way to Kushina's room to wait for her to awaken. Upon seeing her unconscious form with tubes and needles protruding from her body, they both felt saddened that events had brought her to this. However, this didn't change the fact that they were both quite angry, and they would demand answers from the woman once she was conscious again. Asuma wasn't a happy man at the moment, not in the least. His parents kicked Naruto out of their family by naming his sister their heir. What the hell were they thinking? Minato was no different than his own father, the bastard that he was. In fact, Minato was worse. At least his old man never kicked any of his kids out of the house for completely groundless reasons. He simply ignored and neglected all of them while they were growing up, and even though he was cold to them, Asuma knew that Hiruzen Sarutobi wasn't heartless. He loved them, he just consciously made the decision to love the village more. But Minato, how the hell were his shinobi supposed to respect the leadership of a man who would sell out and betray his own flesh and blood when it suited him? Did he really expect his shinobi to follow orders that could lead them to their deaths if he wasn't willing to lead them there and possibly die himself? Asuma didn't like the fact that most of the missions he was sent on were extended-length missions that took place outside the village. He always wanted to be here so that he could help Naruto out more. He knew the boy was wicked smart, and a lot stronger and more skilled than he let on. In fact, he wanted to be the boy's Junin sensei once he graduated from the academy so that he could play a bigger role in unleashing the boy's full potential. He knew it in his gut. Naruto was greatness itself, just waiting to come out. A huge chunk of diamond waiting to be etched and polished. Asuma couldn't help the smile that crossed his face as he recalled the first time he met the monkey-tailed boy. Flashback no jutsu. So you're Naruto Namikaze, huh? Asuma asked a 6-year-old Naruto Namikaze with a friendly smile. He had heard about the boy through several people, most of them derogatory towards the boy, although Mikoto Uchiha and the Ichirakus seemed to like him. Intrigued by this child, Asuma, for some reason, felt compelled to search for him and introduce himself. He'd found him when he sensed a different chakra signature coming from one of the training grounds, where he now found himself. Yeah, that's me. Naruto began somewhat warily, which Asuma noticed. And you are? Asuma Sarutobi, kiddo. Nice to meet ya. he introduced himself and extended his hand for the boy to shake. You too, Mr. Sarutobi, Naruto replied, again somewhat warily, though he took the hand offered to him and shook it. Asuma laughed and told the boy, you can just call me Asuma, Naruto. I've heard a good little bit about you. Naruto's eyes narrowed into a frown at that. Do you believe everything you hear? Actually, no I don't. Asuma answered him straightforwardly. I prefer to make judgments based on my own observations rather than on hearsay. Seeing that Asuma meant what he just said, Naruto's frown became a confused one. You're not like the other villagers. So I've seen. I've actually been away from the village for a while. I just finished serving as one of the Guardian Ninja 12, so I've spent the last 8 years in the capital with Daimyo and his family. Really? Naruto suddenly became excited. Wow, I've heard you have to be, like, crazy strong to be part of the Guardians. Asuma, for his part, was impressed. I'm surprised that someone your age knows of us. That's quite impressive. Naruto simply smiled and scratched the back of his head somewhat sheepishly. Yeah, well. Asuma just studied the boy before him. After a few moments, his gaze landed on Naruto's tail. Naruto noticed where his gaze landed and began to grow angry. Yeah, I've got a tail. The villagers love to make fun of me for it. Is that what you came here to do? Whoa, easy there, Asuma responded calmly, raising his hands as a peacemaking gesture. That's not what I came here for at all. In fact, I think your tail is pretty cool. Did you know that we Sarutobi are known for having monkey summons as partners? Okay, now that's cool. Naruto exclaimed, completely changing his tune, before he asked, could you show me? Asuma thought for a moment before answering, meh, why not? With that, Asuma went through the hand signs for the summoning, placed his hand on the ground and shouted, summoning jutsu. With a poof of smoke, a huge ape appeared wearing a Konoha headband. Said ape turned to Asuma and asked, Asuma, what is the reason you have summoned me? King Enma, I wanted to introduce you to Naruto Namikaze, the son of the fourth Hokage, Asuma responded, extending his arm to point in Naruto's direction. Enma's eyes followed Asuma's arm and landed on the boy in question, immediately taking notice of the tail behind him that was wagging back and forth unconsciously. A human with a monkey's tail. Interesting, I've never seen such a thing before, he observed as he immediately snatched Naruto up by the tail. Gya! Naruto bellowed out in pain. Lemego, Lemego, Lemego. Enma immediately dropped Naruto, who gently cradled his mangled tail in his hands and rubbed it gingerly. My apologies, boy. I didn't realize that your tail was so sensitive, Enma offered. Yeah, Naruto replied through his pain-filled grimace. Anytime someone grabs my tail, my whole body freezes up in pain. I can't stand it. Might I offer a suggestion, then? Enma asked. Yes, sir. If your tail is long enough for you to wrap around your waist and tuck the end underneath the base, then try doing that. It would keep your tail out of the way, and it wouldn't give anyone a protrusion to grab onto. Naruto stared at King Enma before adopting a thoughtful expression. Sir, I think I might just try that. Thank you. Enma nodded before leaving Naruto with one last tidbit. I look forward to hopefully seeing you in the future, Naruto Namikaze. You appear to have more in common with my kin than other humans. And with that, he vanished, leaving Naruto and Asuma alone once more. Asuma walked Naruto back into town and treated him to ramen before walking him back home. Kai. Minato Namikaze was going to get a piece of Asuma Sarutobi's mind the moment he was done giving his report. Minato was getting extremely annoyed. Why? One of his ninja, Asuma Sarutobi, had signed back into the village over 3 hours ago, and he still had not reported in to be debriefed on his mission. He didn't like it when his shinobi didn't follow protocol in a timely manner. It was something that always annoyed him about Kakashi, but at one of his best Junin and his student, he could let it slide. Asuma, being at or near Kakashi's level, could also be allowed some leeway, though it didn't mean Minato had to like it. An hour had passed since Minato had gone back into his office, and he was feeling much calmer, now that he was settling into his normal routine. He never thought he would be grateful for excessive paperwork that would keep him away from his home. He was glad for the distraction that work provided him. No crazy wives looking to permanently injure him. Nobody to spit in his face or ban him and his family from their businesses. No comments on how he was a monster or a terrible father, or anything of the like. Just sheets of paper with little scribbles of ink on them that he could stamp and sign. The irony of his looking forward to doing paperwork wasn't lost on him. He decided to take a break after finishing the biggest stack of papers. He sat there, leaning back in his chair with his eyes closed. His mind began to wander back to how everything in his home and life had just gone to hell after that little bastard knocked his baby girl around and landed her in the hospital, Naomi's absence at home. Followed by Kushina's getting worried about Naruto, her staying out of the house and not cooking, her beating and sterilizing him after he told her to give up on the worthless little failure that he kicked out of his family, Mikoto and Chuki saying the things they said to him. And in public, no less. What the hell was going on? First of all, Kushina never worried about Naruto before, so why did she get worried now? And what was that stupidity about keeping him there at the house? What did she expect to happen to him? Did she really think that he was just going to let Naruto stay there under his roof when he was no longer part of the family? And then, why did she beat him so mercilessly when he told her to stop looking for him? It's not like it mattered whether he was found or not, and he was no longer their problem, so why? Mikoto and Chuki, he could understand to a degree, as they, for reasons that were beyond him, were both rather fond of Naruto. Minato was brought out of his thoughts as his door opened. The object of his annoyed thoughts, Asuma Sarutobi, entered and closed the door behind him. Junin Asuma Sarutobi reporting in. My mission was successful, he offered with a bow to his commander. Excellent Asuma. Please give me the details. Asuma reported the details of his mission, while Minato nodded in approval at Asuma's actions and the facts of the mission. Congratulations on a mission well done, Asuma. You're dismissed, Minato offered, but Asuma had more to say. Hokage-sama, there is something else that I would like to speak to you about. Please don't interrupt me until I'm done. This is a matter that's rather personal to me, says Asuma in a serious tone. Go ahead and get whatever you need to say off your chest, said Minato, curious as to what he is going to say. Okay, he took a deep breath before he bellowed out, using wind chakra to increase the volume of his voice. What is wrong with you? When I heard that a new Hokage had been appointed, I had hoped that he wouldn't commit the same sins his predecessor did, which was sacrificing his family for the sake of his village. Excuse me? Minato asked in shock. Asuma continued, not lowering the volume of his voice at all. I mean, come on. What's the point of having the village love you if your family is in shambles? How could you do what you did to Naruto? He did nothing to deserve it. And what's more, how in the hell can you expect any of us to respect your leadership if you're willing to betray your son and sell him out just because it suits you? Minato gave Asuma a warning glare. That sounds an awful lot like treason to me, Asuma. It's not treason, you idiot. It's just the logical conclusion that any leaf shinobi worth their salt would draw from all of this. It's what I'm already starting to hear all over the village. And frankly, they're right. Minato stood up and looked Asuma dead in the eye. I did this because I knew that my daughter would be very important to this world, that she would save it if she was on the right path. So you're trying to make your daughter into something that could well be beyond her abilities and her character. Asuma said in disgust. And because of your idiotic delusions, your only son had to suffer and be beaten right under your nose. Minato simply looks away, not meeting his eyes. I'm a clan head, and the Hokage. I don't have to explain myself to anyone, least of all you. Asuma narrowed his eyes as he studied the man in front of him before asking in a low voice, I know the face of a criminal who's about to be exposed when I see one. What exactly aren't you telling me? You're standing on dangerous ground. Right now, Junin Sarutobi, Minato warned him through gritted teeth. Leave this office immediately before you say something you're going to regret. Asuma just turned on his heel and walked toward the door, but stopped before he left. And when they do, I'll be there to laugh off at your stupidity, and gloat at your utter and well-deserved ruin. With that, he left the room, not even giving Minato the chance to respond. He didn't like that look in Minato's eyes as he talked about his daughter in comparison to his son. There was something sinister about it. The fact that he said he didn't need to explain himself concerning his son's beatings when he had the full power and authority to stop them also didn't sit well with him. Was it possible that he not only allowed the beatings to take place, but might have even had a hand in causing them? Two complete disappointments. The third, and the fourth. Asuma knew what the village needed in its Hokage. The leaf needed a Hokage like the first and second. Men that didn't sacrifice family for the village, and at the same time, men that didn't sacrifice the village for family, either. They sacrificed themselves so that neither the village nor their families had to suffer or be sacrificed. It suddenly struck Asuma. If you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. He was at least as talented as his father, or even as Minato, in the shinobi arts. He was certainly better at taijutsu than either one of them, particularly armed taijutsu, and he had far greater mastery over his elements than either of them did as well. While he didn't use fūinjutsu a lot, it was an area that he had some skill in, and it came pretty easily to him as a discipline of study. His mind was made up. If someone needed to perform the job of Hokage right, then by Kami, he would be the one to do it. And he would ensure that Naruto was given justice and restitution for these atrocities and affronts that were committed against him. It was time for a fifth Hokage to take the hat. He walked out of Hokage Tower to begin planning his investigation of Minato's actions, as well as to make plans to seriously vamp up his training. If he wanted to be Hokage, he would have to be able to at least stand toe-to-toe with Minato Namikaze in battle, if not best him. He had to be in a position to take the hat before he involved the daimyo in getting Minato removed from office. He couldn't take the chance that yet another disappointment would be given the job if he got the daimyo involved too soon. On his way to his home, it occurred to him that the Hokage's wife had been taken to the hospital. Based on what he overheard of her conversation in the ramen stand, he thought she might be interested to know about the conversation he just had with her husband in his office, as well as the suspicions that it brought. He changed direction, heading for the hospital. Kushina slowly opened her eyes as she returned to consciousness. Blinking at the glaring lights, she took a minute to let her eyesight adjust before looking around to get her bearings. She could see various medical machines of all kinds, with tubes that seemed to be connected to her. Looking herself over, she saw that there were several needles in her arms, secreting various chemicals and fluids into her bloodstream. Why am I in the hospital? How did I get here? She asked herself as she continued to look around the room. Her gaze landed on the two people she could last remember interacting with, Mikoto Uchiha and Tsuki Ichiraku. Both of them were sitting on the other side of the room, not facing her. Mikoto. Tsuki. She asked tiredly. garnering their attention. Both of them turned to look her way in response to hearing her voice. "Welcome back, Kushina," Mikoto offered softly with a sympathetic smile. "How do you feel?" "Drained," Kushina responded with a weak smile before adding with a shiver, "and kind of cold. Is there another blanket in here, anywhere?" "I'll get you one, Kushina," Tsuki responded as he got up and went into the closet, pulling 2 extra blankets and bringing them to Kushina before unfolding them and placing them over her. "Thank you, Tsuki," she responded gratefully. With a sad smile, Tsuki simply nodded before returning to his seat. Mikoto stepped out of the room to inform one of the staff on duty that Kushina had woken up. Kushina turned her gaze to Tsuki and asked, "Did you and Mikoto bring me here?" "That's right," Tsuki began. "We also found out what you did to Minato in your son's defense a few days ago as well. Listen, maybe we were both a little hasty in condemning you." Kushina interrupted him. "No, Tsuki. You weren't. Nothing you said to me was unfair. I've already thought about most of the things you and Mikoto said to me. I realize that I never did get concrete evidence of any wrongdoing by Naruto, and I never did get his side of the story, either. It hurt me so much to realize," her eyes began to well up once again, "that I can't even remember when I might have had a single interaction with Naruto that was happy. I don't really know how things came to this, either. But what hurts the most is that I realize that I don't even know my son." Kushina sniffled as her voice started to break once more, but before she could continue, Mikoto walked in with none other than Tsunade. "Hi, Kushina," Tsunade offered warmly before frowning in concern. "What's wrong?" She began to sob out. "I'm the world's worst mother." Tsunade frowned in surprise before responding, "Kushina, that's not true. You're a great mother to Naomi." Kushina interrupted her, raising her voice. "Naomi's not my only child." Tsunade flinched at her outburst, as well as at the look of agonizing torment on her face. Kushina continued, "I was a terrible mother to Naruto. Why didn't I care for my son?" She looked Tsunade dead in the eye. "Why didn't you care for my son? Why didn't anyone in this family of monsters love him? Why were Mikoto and the Ichirakus the only people who cared about my baby boy?" Kushina couldn't continue, as she simply broke down into bawling, racking sobs. Mikoto moved over to her bedside and put her arms around her friend, allowing her to weep into her shoulder and chest while stroking her head and rubbing her back in an effort to soothe and comfort her. Tsuki followed suit a few moments later, laying a comforting hand on Kushina's shoulder. Tsunade was stricken. Did Kushina really think of her family as monsters? As her daughter's godparents, that would include her and Jiraiya. Wait a minute, weren't they also Naruto's godparents? But then, why did she act as though Minato and Kushina only had one child? Granted, she rarely if ever saw Naruto. He just wasn't ever at home, but, still. Could she really have put the boy out of her mind to such a degree that she didn't even ponder his existence? Granted, she knew just like everyone else that he was a troublemaker, but even most troublemakers only became troublemakers for the attention that causing trouble brought to them. Tsunade's face morphed into a horrified gape. They really had neglected him to that degree. What had they done? She needed to talk to Jiraiya about this as soon as possible. "Kushina," Tsunade began, trying to hold back tears of her own and garnering the redhead's attention, "you're right. We did neglect and ignore him, but it's not too late for us to change. Where is he at the moment? We can go get him and we can show him that we do care for him." "Tsunade, that isn't possible right now," Mikoto interrupted her. "What do you mean?" Tsunade asked in response, tears of fear beginning to roll down her face. "The reason that Kushina is in here is because for the last week, She's pushed herself to exhaustion and even to near death in an effort to find Naruto so that she could bring him home. This is the first time she's slept in 4 days, and she had depleted her chakra to keep herself moving. She's searched the village high and low, and even scoured the countryside and forests 30 miles out in every direction. She explained before finishing with grim firmness, Naruto is long gone. How could he be long gone? Tsunade demanded. He's a child. How will he survive out there? How will he be able to keep himself safe? A new voice, an unmistakable male, answered her question. Naruto's much more powerful than you can imagine, Lady Tsunade. All 4 of the room's occupants turned to the sound of the voice, all of them surprised to see who the owner of it was. Asuma Sarutobi, Kushina asked, confused by his sudden appearance. What brings you here? And, what do you know about my son? Asuma sighed before coming into the room and closing the door. He placed a silencing seal on the wall beside the door and activated it. Once done with that, he turned to the room's occupants and began to answer. I met Naruto a few years back when he was training in one of the more out-of-the-way training grounds. He's one very determined boy, and he's also quite powerful and talented. I planned on being his Junin sensei once he graduated from the academy because I wanted to help him realize his full potential. He looked at all 4 of the room's occupants and stated with conviction, Naruto will without a doubt become the single most powerful shinobi that this village has ever produced. Even the first 2 Hokages will pale in comparison to what Naruto will become. That's the kind of potential Naruto possesses, and I think it's a shame and a crime that that potential hasn't even been tapped yet. Kushina and Tsunade looked on in awe and surprise. Did Naruto truly possess that kind of potential? How was it that they didn't even notice? They knew the answer to the question as soon as they asked it of themselves. They didn't care enough to look. Mikoto and Chuki, on the other hand, both wore knowing and admiring smiles, feeling in their guts that what Asuma said was indeed true. Asuma regarded them all once more. Can I count on your discretion? All of you. They all frowned in confusion or in thought before nodding in the affirmative. All right, then. What's discussed here stays here for now, agreed. Again, a round of nods was his response. Lady Kushina, if you don't mind telling me, why exactly did you strip Naruto of his inheritance and give it to his sister? And what were your plans for him afterwards? Kushina looked down and closed her eyes, collecting her thoughts before beginning. Well, my reasons for it were due to the reputation that Naruto had developed throughout the village as a violent delinquent. People everywhere were accusing him of bringing shame to our family, and so Minato talked to me about naming Naomi our heir, so that our family's honor and good name would be preserved. I was still going to allow him to live at home with his family, even if he wasn't our heir anymore. He's still my son, and I wasn't about to let him be thrown out of his own house. In Uzushio, there were many Uzumakis who were disinherited for whatever reason, but we never threw them out of our homes. They were family, and we didn't do that to them. Kushina, who was it that told you that Naruto was a problem child? Mikoto asked curiously. Most everyone I talked to in the village, passers-by, village counselors, you name it. So you took the word of people who despise him and would gladly gut him with a smile over that of your son. Your own flesh and blood. Kushina snapped up and looked Mikoto dead in the eye. Mikoto, do you really think I hadn't thought about that? It's just that literally everyone I would talk to would tell me the same thing, and different eyewitnesses that I talked to at different times would have stories that match, and that would also check out. As in, Naruto was where they said he was at the time of these altercations, and they would say who was involved, and the names would all match up. He would always come home with cuts and bruises as well. It was all just so perfect that none of it could have been made up. But what if it was in fact fabricated? Asuma asked nobody in particular, his finger to his chin as he looked down in thought. What do you mean? Tsunade asked. Think about it for a minute, Asuma explained. Tsuki, Ayame told me about the time where Naruto beat down 3 chunin and 2 full-grown civilian men when he was, what, 7? You see, it's things like that that I'm talking about. Kushina exclaimed in an effort to defend her reasoning. Kushina, Tsuki turned to her. The reason Naruto did that to those men was because they were in the process of tearing off my little girl's clothes so that they could rape her. Both Kushina's and Tsunade's eyes went wide. Kushina, in shock, breathed out, what? That's right, Tsuki answered matter-of-factly. Naruto beat those men up defending my daughter's virtue and dignity. But that, Kushina began to look this way and that in an effort to wrap her mind around this new information. Why wasn't I told? You never gave Naruto the chance to tell you, Mikoto answered. No, that's not what I mean, Kushina responded. I mean, yes, of course I should have given him the chance to explain himself, but why wasn't I told by anyone else? It is rather strange that a crime committed by Leaf Shinobi against a Leaf citizen within the village walls wasn't made public record, isn't it? Especially when it's required by law. Asuma offered. But how can that be? Tsunade asked. That's a situation where even if Naruto had been allowed to explain, only Tsuki and Ayame would have backed him, and Kushina might not have believed him anyway, precisely because there's no public record of such an event. Do you still think that fabrication of Naruto's behavioral issues is too far-fetched to be believed? Asuma asked, bringing them all to the conclusion that they knew to be true. And aside from that, Lady Kushina, you mentioned that Naruto always came home with bruises and injuries from his so-called fights with other children or bullies, is that right? That's right, Kushina answered. And yet he hospitalized 3 Chunin-level shinobi and 2 full-grown civilian men, and walked away from the encounter without so much as a scratch. See where I'm going with this? Kushina and Tsunade both gasped. Tsunade was the one to answer. Naruto, he couldn't have gotten his injuries from fighting children or even teenagers. He couldn't have been injured unless, Tsunade pondered for a moment, unless he let them do it. Asuma nodded in the affirmative. But why would he let people hurt him? Kushina asked in desperation. And why didn't he come and talk to me about it? I'm his mother, I would have helped him or done something. Kushina, would you really? Mikoto asked patiently. Kushina looked stricken at the question, while Tsunade looked indignant. You didn't know any of this before. Mikoto proceeded to explain herself. You always operated under the assumption that Naruto was causing trouble. You would have simply thought that he was lying and trying to lay blame elsewhere. Aside from that, the reason that Naruto let them do it is because he's not a violent boy, unless he has a very good reason to be. He probably stood there and let his attackers beat him up. He's always healed and been made stronger after every beating somehow, anyway. If you were to ask Naomi just what she did to provoke Naruto into hurting her so badly, I somehow think that you'd find her answer interesting. Kushina's face morphed into a saddened grimace as her eyes welled up once more. She hung her head and began to cry once more as she lamented through her tears, what have I done? This time it was Tsunade who came to her bedside and wrapped her arms around the woman in soothing comfort. Tsunade began to shed tears of her own. Her own blissful ignorance of the situation was now causing her own heart to break as guilt made itself known. Several minutes later, Asuma began once more. I'm afraid there's more. Kushina looked at him and steeled her gaze directly at him. Please tell me everything. I want to know it all. I need to know. Your husband is somehow involved in all of this. I wouldn't be surprised if he's involved with your daughter as well. Kushina's eyes went wide in shock. She began to hyperventilate once more, though this time, Tsunade was quick to find a paper bag for her to breathe into. Giving her the bag, Kushina put it to her lips and blew her exhale into it, immediately inhaling what she had just exhaled. After a minute of this, she calmed down once more. Listen, I know this is a lot to spring on you, Asuma began. No, please don't stop, Asuma, Kushina interrupted him. I want to hear what you have to say. Asuma thought for a moment, then nodded, all right. As I said, I don't know the reasons, but I know that Minato is involved in all of these events somehow. You think he swept them under the rug, or just ignored them? Kushina asked fearfully. No, I know for a fact that he did those things, as much as admitted it to me. What I think is that his involvement is actually far worse than that. I think he might have had a major part in even orchestrating these fabrications, Asuma told them all gravely. No, that can't be. Please, it can't be. Kushina began to grow frantic again until Mikoto once more wrapped her arms around her friend, allowing her to cry once more if she needed to. Asuma continued sorrowfully, I'm sorry. I really am. But, when I confronted him about it today, well, he had the look of a guilty criminal who was about to be exposed. He even tried to threaten me when I brought it up. Kushina started bawling once more. The more she learned, the more foolish, heartless and helpless she felt. She was at a loss as to what to do. What could she do to fix this situation? Tsuki also informed Kushina, Kushina, I told Minato earlier that he and his family are no longer welcome at my stand. And I'm going to post a sign saying as much. He smiled softly, I'll make an exception for you alone. Kushina looked Tsuki dead in the eye. Don't worry about that, Tsuki. I won't be keeping the Namikaze moniker on my name for that much longer. If Asuma's theories are proven true, I'm done with that man, and if I find out that Naomi played a part in this, then Kami help me, I'm done with her as well. I might be able to help you speed that process along, Asuma offered. Kushina turned to him, how? As one of the former Guardian Ninja 12, I know Daimyo and his family quite well. In the 8 years I served them, I distinguished myself above the others and never once did I ask him for anything of a personal nature. I have quite a few favors I can call in. If you want to leave Minato, I can get your petition directly into his hands to be made legal with only your signature, and I can make it happen within the course of a day. Kushina just stared at him before breathing out, thank you. Asuma just smiled and nodded. Mikoto addressed him next. So what happens from here? Well, Asuma answered, I'm going to do some investigating and see what I can't dig up about this whole mess. I promised myself that I would make sure Naruto got some justice and restitution for what's been done to him. He narrowed his eyes at Mikoto as he thought about recent developments. Mikoto, as the last living adult Uchiha, you have access to the Uchiha Police Force's archives, don't you? Mikoto narrowed her eyes just as thoughtfully. As a matter of fact, yes, I do. Could you grant me access to them? I'd be interested to see what's in there about all of this. They've got to have some records about it. The Uchiha matriarch gave the bearded Junin a knowing smile. I'd be happy to do so. Can you meet me at Police HQ in a couple of hours? I'll be there, he replied to her before turning to the other two ladies in the room. Lady Tsunade, Lady Kushina, could the two of you take some time to train me? Train you? Why? Tsunade asked curiously. I need to really vamp up my skills. I'm creating a plan to deal with all of this. My father and the fourth have both fallen so far short of the bar that the first and second Hokages set. Neither of them would have sacrificed their family for the village, nor the village for their family. The only people that they sacrificed were themselves. My old man was already near the end of his life when he sealed the Kyuubi, so it wasn't a big deal to him. while Minato hasn't sacrificed anything of himself at all since he's been in office. I think it's time for a new Hokage, one who would stand up for the will of fire. The room's occupants thought about what he was saying. It was Tsunade who caught on first. Wait a minute, Tsunade began. You don't mean. That's right. Someone's got to do it, and I'm ready to step up and be that someone. But, I need to actually become a cage-level shinobi first. Lady Tsunade, could you train me in advanced chakra control? Lady Kushina, could you train me in kenjutsu and fūinjutsu? I also plan to talk to Might Guy to give me some specialized taijutsu training. Asuma, I would be happy to help you with your ninjutsu, if you want, Mikoto offered. From what I've seen here, I think that you would make a fine Hokage and lead us back to what the village was founded on. The will of fire, and the conviction that the Leaf Village is a family. I'm in, Tsunade replied. So am I, Kushina replied immediately after. Thank you, all of you. Asuma expressed his gratitude. We can meet for breakfast tomorrow to discuss the regimen. How does that sound? You can use my stand, Chuki suggested. I'll get everything started early and make you all some breakfast a couple hours before we open. Thanks, Chuki, Tsunade said with a smile. So, Kushina, Mikoto addressed her bedridden friend. What are your plans for when you get out of here? I just want my little boy back home and safe. Nothing else matters to me right now, Kushina answered before her voice began to break yet again. But I can't give him a home, anymore. Kushina, that's not necessarily true. Tsunade interrupted her. If, or rather when, you leave Minato, you'll be moving out of his house and getting your own place. Naruto just can't live on Namikaze clan property anymore, but if you don't either, you can take him in and give him anything you want. And if nothing else, when Naruto comes back, I'll be happy to take him in. You too, if you want. We'll keep looking for him, we won't rest. And when we find him, we'll bring him back to the most loving home he could ever imagine living in. Yeah, Kushina smiled tearfully. That's my heart's desire, right now. I don't care anymore about what he did to Naomi, or whether his reasons were just or not. I was going to punish him for it, but, right now, I just want to hold him in my arms and tell him that things will be different from now on. Yeah, Tsunade agreed, and when we get you out of here, we can go ahead and make plans for a more organized search, okay? Kushina nodded. Minato was still in his office, just hoping that there wouldn't be any more trouble, or any more bad news. He had already had enough to last a decade. Unfortunately, fate would not be so kind to him. Lord Hokage, he heard someone ask. He looked up to see a medical ninja at his door. Please, come in, he invited the man, offering him a seat. Sir, I wish I had better news for you. This concerns your wife and daughter. My wife. What's wrong with her? She was admitted to the hospital today for dehydration, chakra exhaustion and sleep deprivation. Apparently, she'd been scouring the outskirts of Konoha searching for your missing son. Minato's teeth ground together as his former son was mentioned. Though the medic didn't notice, she hadn't slept in more than 3 days, and she hadn't been eating, either. She just kept pushing herself to the brink of exhaustion, even to the point of near death. Minato's eyes went wide as he jumped up. How is she now? Is she all right? She's fine, sir, the medic assured him. She'll actually be released in a few short hours after Lady Tsunade gives her the all-clear. Mikoto Uchiha and Tsuki Ichiraku were able to get her to the hospital in time for her to be treated so that she would make a full recovery. So that's why they were there. Why didn't they tell me about Kushina? He wondered, both surprised and alarmed that he wasn't made aware of the situation. He brought himself back to the present moment. You said you also had news of my daughter. Yes, sir. You'd better brace yourself for this, the medic responded, causing Minato to worry greatly. What is it? He asked. We've found another injury on her person. What do you mean, another injury? Sir, the blow she took to her abdomen caused irreversible damage to her ovaries and womb. I'm afraid she's been rendered infertile. I'm sorry, sir. She'll never be able to have children. Minato allowed the news to sink in. This was bad. Naruto was no longer part of his family, but now he no longer had a viable heir. If Naomi couldn't have children, the Namikaze family would die out with her. This realization brought a look of uncontrollable rage on his face as he made a very dark promise to himself. You little bastard. I'll find you and I'll make your life a living hell for what you've done to me and my precious daughter. It had been 5 days since Naruto left Wave to return to the time chamber. He had been able to master his Super Saiyan 2 form, as Goku-sensei called it, to the same level as his Super Saiyan form. Naruto, who was in his original form, was currently walking into Iron Country with his power level suppressed down to 0 as to not attract any attention. Thank God Goku-sensei had me train in energy suppression as well as energy detection, Naruto thought as he walked down the road. About 10 minutes later Naruto suddenly heard a loud ruckus and a scream. Without a second thought, Naruto took off towards the ruckus and screamed. When Naruto got to the origin of the noise he saw a little girl on the ground unconscious with 5 grown men standing over her, looking at her with cross expressions on their faces. Naruto did not even take time to call out to them before taking action. He instant transmissioned behind one of them, and chopped him at the base of his skull, knocking him out. He then used his speed to appear behind the other men and knock them out in a similar fashion. Once he had them all knocked out, he placed 4 limb restriction seals on the 5 men. The seals restricted their movements like his weight seals did, and he set them to about the weight he had on right now. With the men taken care of for now, Naruto decided to attend to the child, who had a few bruises, but nothing serious. He gently woke her, and as she opened her eyes she began crying and screaming her head off. He quickly wrapped her in a hug, trying to calm her down. Shish, everything is going to be alright, you're safe now. Those bad men won't hurt you anymore, he said in a sweet, caring tone. Who or why you? The girl asked, fear still evident in her voice. My name is Naruto, and yours is? He asked in the same tone when he began to speak to the girl. Sarah, my name is Sarah, she replied, beginning to relax in his presence. Thank you, Sarah. Now, can you tell where you're from so I can get you home? Asks Naruto. She nods, and replies, I live in Iron Country with my grandpa, who is a great samurai general. Naruto chuckles at her enthusiasm. All right, Sarah, can you tell me what your grandpa looks like, so I can recognize him? He asks Sarah, as she nods. He's my GG, and he has long, furry whiskers under his nose and an even longer furry whisker on his chin that goes down to his shoulders. He also has the top of his head wrapped up like a mummy. She giggles as she defines his features. Okay, thanks Sa-chan. Now, how would you like me to give you a piggyback ride? Naruto asks, as Sarah pouts cutely for the nickname then gets an ecstatic expression hearing the offer of a piggyback ride. Sarah begins to scramble onto his back as Naruto glances at the 5 men on the ground unconscious. The men begin to rise and float in the air, and Sarah is mesmerized by this. All right, Sa-chan. Hold on tight, okay? Naruto says as she nods. He then takes off like a bullet with Sarah giggling all the way, while the unconscious, floating men stayed with him. An hour of walking later brought Sarah and Naruto to a village gate. Naruto then sets Sarah back on the ground, much to her disappointment, and lets the floating men fall in a heap on the ground. Suddenly, Naruto and Sarah are surrounded by 4 samurai. Sarah-sama, it is good to see you alive and unharmed. Mifune-sama may not show it, but he has been exceedingly worried, says one of the samurai, who is glaring at Naruto with distrust. So, you're one of the fools that took Sarah. He didn't even get to finish his sentence when Sarah shouted out, "No. Naruto didn't hurt me. He saved me from the bad men behind us. Look, I just want to get this Sa-chan back to her grandfather as well as meeting your leader. There are some things that I want to discuss with your leader," Naruto says, trying to defuse the tense situation. The 2 men looked back and forth between Naruto and the 2 bad men, as Sarah had called them, before nodding and ordering, "Come with us." General Mifune was going through some reports of the nations that surrounded his humble little land. News of the goings-on within the elemental nations, while rarely affecting his country directly, could still have unintended effects on his nation, their economy, their political stability, their sovereignty, at least if some power-hungry fool got too big for his britches and tried invading. It had happened before, even if it was never successful. 6 people suddenly appeared in his office. His granddaughter Sarah, 4 of his samurai guards, and, who was that? The 6th person was a black-haired boy with 3 strange etchings on each of his cheeks and a mile-wide grin. "Mifune-sama, your granddaughter was found just a short time ago, and we have bought you her savior," spoke the leader of the 4 samurai. "Savior?" Mifune asked rhetorically before turning to the stranger and asking in a calm, collected tone, "Who are you and why do you have my granddaughter practically wrapped around your legs?" "My name is Naruto, Mifune-sama, and I came across your granddaughter with 5 grown men while entering Iron Country. She appeared distressed, leading me to believe that she was with them against her will, so I did what any decent person would do. I saved her and brought her to your village to return her to her family where I was escorted to your office now," spoke Naruto in a respectful tone. I thank you for saving my granddaughter. Is there anything I can do to repay you?" asks Mifune. "Well, would it be possible for you to help me with my project? Currently, I am starting a new village, and I would like allies," Naruto says before beginning his story. He then tells Mifune about his past, excluding his Saiyan heritage, to save Wave, and his plans concerning the new village. "Well, Naruto-san, that is quite a goal that you have there, and since I owe you a huge favor and I'm curious to where this will lead, I'll make an alliance between Iron Country and the future Namagakure," Mifune replies. "Thank you Mifune-sama for this opportunity." Naruto bows to him, grateful for Mifune setting up an alliance with him. Just as Naruto is about to leave, he feels something clamp on his leg. He looks down to see Sarah holding his leg in a vice grip. "You're not going to leave yet, are you?" Sarah asks in a scared tone, not wanting her new friend to leave so soon. Naruto bends down to look her eye to eye. "No, I'll stay for a few days. So, right now, how would you like to escort me through your home?" Naruto placates and asks her all at once. Sarah looks ecstatic about Naruto staying for a few days. Both of them leave Mifune's office to explore the village. When Naruto and Sarah left, and were out of earshot, one of the remaining samurai asked Mifune, "Mifune-sama, are you sure that it is wise to let your granddaughter stay with him?" Mifune replies, "Yes, I'm sure that my granddaughter will be quite safe with him considering the fact that he saved her from being taken out of Iron Country. Who knows what would have happened to my granddaughter then?" Naruto and Sarah were currently walking through the village, and Sarah was showing him all the sights. It was getting to around lunchtime, so they decided to stop at a small restaurant of Sarah's choice. After having their fill, they begin to sightsee once more. Then, Naruto notices a strange shop, and asks Sarah about the store and she replies, It's a weapons store. You want to go in? Naruto nods his head as he and Sarah proceed to walk towards the weapons store. As Naruto opened the door, a bell rang, alerting the owner that he had customers, which he then greeted Naruto and Sarah. Hello, my dear good sir. Is there anything that I can help you with today? The owner asked in his most hospitable tone, trying to coax his newest customer into buying something. Yes, I am looking for a sword of good quality, replies Naruto, ignoring the tone of the owner. All right then, sir. If you'll just follow me. We keep our swords in the back, so you can pick any sword or swords that you fancy, replied the owner. As Naruto, Sarah, and the store owner walked into the back room, Naruto couldn't help but be in awe at the sheer number of swords that the room held. There were broadswords, ninjatus, katanas, tanfos, and any other sort of sword that you could imagine. After a few minutes of browsing through the enormous display of swords, Naruto found a sword that caught his eye. It was a double-edged short sword, think one of Killer Bee's swords, and glanced at the owner. Is all of your weapons forged with chakra conductive steel? He asks the owner. The owner replies, yes, they are, considering we're in the land of iron, which is the home of samurai. After Naruto and Sarah left the store, Naruto persuaded Sarah to take him to the nearest training ground to get used to his sword. Naruto began his training with his new sword, but it was a little difficult. He was currently trying to incorporate the use of the sword into his taijutsu style, the turtle hermit fist. After 30 minutes and having little success, he then notices Mifune watching him. Mifune-sama, how long were you there? Naruto asked, curious as to how much Mifune saw. I was watching you for the past 10 minutes, and from what I've seen, that style that you're using has potential, but you need a partner to help it along. Out of curiosity, what was that style that you're using? Mifune asks, intrigued by the black-haired boy's movements. Well, I was just trying to incorporate my new sword into my taijutsu style, the turtle hermit fist, but I'm not having much luck with it, Naruto said sheepishly, rubbing the back of his head. Boy, I want to see what that taijutsu style of yours is capable of, so with that in mind I want to spar with you, Mifune demanded, interested to see if this boy could be a worthy student. I want to see what you are capable of, that means no holding back. Alright, but you asked for it, Naruto says before blurring out of existence. Mifune's and Naruto's fists met, with Naruto instantly matching Mifune's strength. Man, he might be an old geezer, but his strength surpasses Zabuza's. I might actually have some fun in this spar, thought Naruto, while Mifune was having similar thoughts about the young man in front of him. Giving a small smirk, Mifune asks, what do you say we kick things up a bit? With Naruto simply nodding his head. They both increased their respective strengths and began to engage each other once again. The spar carried on for another 15 minutes, and ended when Naruto used his full speed to land a kick on Mifune's chin, knocking him out. Mifune was being helped on his feet after 5 minutes from his foot-induced unconscious state. He then walked towards Naruto. When he was standing directly in front of him, he said, well done, Naruto, but you still need help developing that style with a sword, so I would like to extend an offer to help you do just that. Mifune-sama, I am honored that you are willing to help me in this, and I'm eternally grateful for everything that you've done for me thus far, Naruto said in a grateful and respectful tone. Well then, let's begin, Mifune said, as Naruto got an exhilarated look on his face. The last several weeks had not been kind to Minato Namikaze. Ever since word had gotten out about him and Kushina kicking Naruto out of the family, maintaining the village's respect towards him as their leader had been an uphill battle. The majority of the people still supported him, but there was a large enough minority that didn't think that it was causing him a lot of problems. Tsuki Ichiraku hadn't relented on his promise about banning his family from his stand. He had even gone so far as to post a large and very visible sign that said, "This establishment does not serve Namikaze scum." Just who the hell did he think he was? Nothing he did could convince the man to take the sign down. He even tried hiring some thugs to discreetly threaten the man, only to have Mikoto, Asuma, Tsunade and Kushina arrive on the scene just in the nick of time to pound the thugs senselessly and force them to run off with their tails between their legs. Several more signs like that started showing up around the village. More and more businesses were closing their doors to him and his daughter. He couldn't say his family anymore because Kushina had withdrawn herself from them, and with the daimyo's backing to boot. He didn't even get to see any divorce papers. She had somehow gotten a petition for divorce, annulment and clan separation into the daimyo's hands, gotten him to sign and stamp it into law, and he didn't even know what had happened until the documents had been dropped on his desk with the daimyo's official seal. He still couldn't get that day out of his mind. Even though it had happened over a month ago, he remembered it as vividly as if it happened yesterday. Flashback no jutsu. Minato had just received the signed and approved petitions for divorce and clan separation that Kushina had apparently submitted to the daimyo behind his back. His daughter was still in the hospital, apparently needing her body purged of some kind of strange energy that he guessed Naruto had infused into her when he attacked her. She wouldn't even know what was going on. How was he supposed to tell her about this? Putting that aside for now, he left a shadow clone to finish up some of the last vestiges of paperwork so that he could get home and talk to Kushina about all of this. Granted, he knew that she was upset about him leading her on about Naruto being able to remain at the house after they had disowned him, but was she really taking things this far? Speeding home, he could only hope that Kushina was still there so that he could talk her out of making a horrible mistake. The moment he got there, he threw open the door and sped to the bedroom that Kushina had taken to sleeping in after she'd left his bed. "Kushina!" he cried out desperately, as he entered the room only to see her packing, with Tsunade and Mikoto helping her. Kushina stopped what she was doing and turned to Minato with a glare that was icy enough to give him the shivers. "With the urgency that you're showing, I can only assume that you got copies of the divorce and separation documents. Am I right?" "Kushina, why?" he asked loudly, shock and confusion written all over his face. "You know why," she answered him straightforwardly. "You deliberately led me on, and made me believe that we could keep Naruto here and be his parents after we named Naomi our heir. You knew that you were lying to me, and I also know that you've been lying to me about my son from the start of his life." Kushina's addressing of Naruto as her son was not lost on him. He frantically began to try explaining himself. "Kushina, please, just listen to me." "I'm done listening to you," she interrupted him harshly, causing him to flinch. "I'm done listening to your lies. I'm done being led on by you, the man who I'm supposed to be able to trust more than any other. You betrayed me. You betrayed my son. You've betrayed the office of the Hokage and made a complete and utter mockery of what the will of fire is supposed to mean. You really are nothing more than a worthless hypocrite. Did you think that I would just accept what you've done to my son and move on? Or were you just hoping that I would never learn the truth? Kushina, please, I can see that you're angry with me, but if you just give me a chance, we can work this out." "Work this out?" Kushina shouted incredulously. "You have not only allowed my son to be beaten by people in this village, but you threw him out of our family, and then you laughed at me when I told you that I wanted to keep him at home, and you think we can work this out? Tell me, Minato, how exactly do you expect to work this out? If I explain to you why I did what I did, would you forgive me for what I've done and for lying to you about it?" he asked hopefully. "No, I won't. The only way I would even consider forgiving you is for you to undo everything you've done to my son, bring the people who have abused him to justice, and give him back not only everything you've stolen from him, but give him retribution for all of your wrongdoings against him as well. And even then, the possibility of my forgiving you is a very big if. I'm sorry, Kushina. I won't do that, he began anew, only to be cut off from her. Then we have nothing more to discuss. Our divorce is final, our clan separation is final, and my only concern now is finding my son an heir. Minato gritted his teeth in fury as Kushina called Naruto her heir, and gave him the home that he deserves and that you've always denied him. Goodbye, Hokage-sama. With that, Kushina grabbed the scrolls that she had just finished sealing all of her and her clan's belongings in and marched past him. Tsunade and Mikoto hot on her heels, also shooting him glares that could burn through steel. Realizing that he had just lost the love of his life over all of this, he dropped to his knees and started to weep bitterly through clenched teeth. Kai. Minato sat in his chair, brooding in his thoughts of that bastard that he had once called a son. This was all his fault. If he hadn't been born, then none of this would have ever happened. His baby girl would be able to grow up and live a happy life, knowing the love of both her parents and not just his love. That was something that hurt him just as much or more than Kushina leaving him. She had all but disowned Naomi, just because she thought that Naruto was the trash that he really was. Why should she hate her daughter just because she had an opinion about the truth? It didn't make sense to him. Sighing sadly, he continued to finish his paperwork so that he could leave the office and visit his little girl. Naomi Namikaze was numb. She had been for some time, ever since that awful day when her mother told her she wanted nothing more to do with her. And over what? She just told her the truth. Why should she be punished for that? She went over the encounter in her mind once more as she had done countless times already since it happened last week, hoping that this one time it would be different, and she'd be able to make sense out of what happened. Flashback no jutsu. She was sitting in her bed, her jaw still wired shut from when her bastard brother had broken it. Why had he gone and done that? All she did was tell him the truth. So what if she called him worthless trash? Are you being insulting to a duck by calling it a duck? Everybody said that he was worthless trash, and they always tried to get him in trouble, so didn't that make it the right thing to do? Sure, she made up stories about him that weren't true, but that didn't matter. He was worthless trash and he needed to know his place. And what was this weird energy stuff that the medics found inside her that was keeping her from healing faster? What did the trash do to her? She was brought out of her musings about him when her mother entered her room. Ka-chan, she said through wired jaws, able to at least speak even if it was mumbled. She tried to smile, though it still hurt. Her efforts to smile ceased, however, when she saw the look on her mother's face. Kushina wasn't smiling like she normally was when she saw her. Granted, it had been 5 or 6 weeks since she'd seen her mother, but the flinty, stern look that she was giving her was unnerving. Ka-chan, what's wrong? Why are you looking at me like that? She asked nervously. Young lady, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I expect you to answer with the complete truth, she said sternly. Will you do that? Naomi was taken aback by her mother's tone. She gulped and nodded nervously. What did you say or do to your brother to cause him to attack you? Naomi's eyes went wide before she narrowed them, answering the question. I simply told him the truth. That you and Tu-chan love me and not him. And that I was getting everything, and that he was being thrown out like the worthless trash that he was. Why? Kushina's steely glare turned to one of shocked disappointment. It caused Naomi to feel uncomfortable, as though she did something wrong. Who told you those things? Kushina asked. Tu-chan, for one. And so did everyone else in the village. They all hate him, so he must be worthless. Naomi answered, surprised that her mother would treat her as though she'd misbehaved somehow. Well, that isn't true, at least not for me. I never loved him any less than I love you, even if I had forgotten that for a long time. But I've learned that many of the things I've heard about your brother simply weren't true. Kushina began. How many of the things you told me about him were lies? Naomi looked at her mother as though she was about to grow a third eye. What difference does it make? It makes all the difference in the world to me, Naomi. Now answer me, Kushina demanded. Why? The worthless trash is out of our family and out of our hair. You were one of the people who threw him out, so what does it matter? She fired back defensively. Naomi, I'm not going to ask again. Kushina growled while releasing some killing intent, causing Naomi to sweat slightly. Answer my question. Fine, she yelled out in fear, causing her mother's ki to subside. Just about everything I ever told you was a lie. I don't think I ever saw him do a single thing wrong. Are you happy now? Kushina looked at Naomi in horror and disgust. Naomi didn't like her mother looking at her that way. It was so uncomfortable. It hurt to see her mother looking at her with such disappointment. Why did you say those things, then? If they weren't true, why would you get your brother in trouble? Kushina asked, her disbelief evident in her voice. Because he's worthless trash, she exclaimed. Everyone says so. Even Dad and Ero Senin think so. You certainly never cared about him before now, so why should I? Because he's family, she answered, looking at her daughter with even more horror than before, causing Naomi to flinch as she continued. Because what we did to him was so horribly wrong, and you should know better than that. I only got angry with Naruto all the time because I honestly thought he was misbehaving and causing trouble. Trouble that you said he caused. But he's my child just as much as you are. No, he's not. Naomi shouted back as tears fell down her face. And stop looking at me like I did something evil. Kushina marched over to Naomi's bed and drummed Naomi across the face, causing her head to snap in the opposite direction as she cried out in pain at the sting of her mother's strike. She turned her gaze back to her mother, who looked at her in even greater horror still, tears rolling down her own face. Why don't you love your brother? She asked, the full brunt of the horror she was feeling at her daughter evident in her tone. What did he do to deserve your hatred? He was, Naomi began, but faltered. She didn't really have a reason. She was just doing what gained her the approval of others, and after a while, she just hated him because that's what everyone else seemed to want her to do. She began to shed a tear, but suppressed the guilt and regret she was feeling the moment it made itself known. The village loved her, especially those who had helped her to craft the lies she told about Naruto. Seeing Naruto get hurt by them and by her parents caused them to like her more, so that was good enough for her. Wanting to fire something back at her mother, she steeled her glare and answered, he was born. Kushina immediately slapped Naomi again, this time sobbing in horror at what her daughter had just told her. When Naomi looked back at her, feeling both regret and anger, Kushina stumbled back 2 steps before breathing out a question. How could I have raised you to be such a monster? Naomi was truly stricken by that. Nobody had ever had a bad thing to say about her. But this was her mother. Her mother of all people, calling her a monster. She began to cry, truly hurt and heartbroken by her mother's words. I won't stop looking at you like you did something evil, Naomi, because you truly did something evil in treating your brother that way. I had no intention of ever kicking him out of my home, because Uzumakis take care of their family, even if we name another heir to our legacy. Kushina trailed off for a moment before Naomi tried to talk to her mother. Ka-chan, please, don't call me that. Kushina cut her off, hurting her even more. I can't even stand to look at you right now. Kushina turned away from Naomi and began to sob, while Naomi did the same, fearing the worst. Kushina turned to walk out of the room, but stopped at the door. She spoke up one final time, not even bothering to turn around. I've divorced your father because of this issue. Naomi gasped, mortified at this news. And until you learn to love your brother, who has never harmed you, or hurt you in any way, you are not my daughter. Because I am an Uzumaki. And no Uzumaki would knowingly treat one of their own in such a vile, horrific manner. You are no Uzumaki, and until you become a true Uzumaki, you are not my daughter. And you are no longer my heir, either. Kushina ran out of the room, not even bothering to look back. Naomi just gaped at the door, horrified at the things her mother had just said, and even more horrified that her mother had essentially disowned her, unless she made some changes in her attitude towards her brother. She hung her head and literally cried herself to sleep. Kai. Naomi still couldn't make any sense of what her mother said. It made her angry that her mother now seemed to hate her for what she did to that worthless bastard. But then, why did part of her also feel guilty and dirty? Why did she sometimes feel so horrible that she was scared to look into a mirror, as if some kind of ugly monster would stare back at her? She shuddered and put it out of her mind yet again, knowing that she wouldn't be able to find an answer, and also knowing that she would replay the scene in her head many more times in the future. Naruto had enjoyed these last 6 months living in Mifune's castle. He was currently in the training grounds going through the sword style that he had developed with Mifune's help. After an hour of practicing strokes, he decided to try out what Mifune had taught him about surging his chakra through his weapon for different effects. He hadn't developed any affinities during his training because he had been working mainly on his ki and taijutsu, so he decided to experiment with his ki by channeling it into his sword. As Naruto channeled ki into his sword, it became engulfed by a bright blue substance that began streaming off the sword's tip. Think what Goku's power did when he first fought Frieza. Naruto then swung his sword in a downward motion towards a training post. He flew out of his sword in a streaming arc towards its intended target, and when it hit the post it exploded. Sashit. Naruto thought. Who was wide-eyed at what had just happened because he was not expecting for the arc to explode like that. Naruto then noticed several energy signatures heading his way. Suddenly, Mifune and several of his samurais appear at Naruto's location, and see the damage that had occurred. What's going on here? Mifune exclaimed, worried at the small explosion that had just occurred within his village. Sorry Mifune-sama. I was trying something with my sword, said a nervous Naruto. As Naruto was speaking to Mifune, someone had discreetly appeared in the area and was watching Naruto. Okay, but do that type of destructive training outside of the village with a supervisor, said Mifune, not wanting his village to be demolished by the black-haired boy's training methods. Naruto nods his head in confirmation hearing this. Everyone begins to go back to their respective posts within the village. When everyone was gone, the person who was discreetly hiding decided to make himself known to Naruto, who had resumed training. So, you're Kakarot's descendant. I wonder if you're any good, the person said. Naruto's attention was gotten the moment this person said, Kakarot. The only person that would know my sensei's Saiyan name would be Vegeta or his descendants, thought Naruto, as this strange person was talking to him. Who are you, and how do you know that particular piece of information? Naruto asked the stranger, wanting to know who this person was. The name is Vegeta, and I am the descendant of the Prince of all Saiyans, Vegeta exclaimed, puffing his chest out in pride. So, you're Vegeta's descendant. Did he train you like Goku trained me? Naruto asked. Vegeta snorts as if the answer is obvious. Of course he trained me, you dolt. Vegeta said, annoyed that Naruto didn't think of the obvious. Well then, how would you like to spar for a little bit? No key attacks or transformations, just taijutsu to keep the locals unaware of our fight, asked Naruto, who wanted to test himself against Vegeta. After Vegeta hears this, he smirks and nods in an affirmative notion. They both assumed their respective stances and began their spar that wouldn't end for 5 hours. 6 months was a long time to be laid up in a hospital bed, but Naomi had finally been released, as they had finally gotten the weird energy out of her system. She was told that she would make a full recovery, but Naruto's attack on her abdominal area had rendered her unable to have children. This saddened her. She was no longer useful as her father's heir, and the Namikaze name would end with her. She would never be able to pass on his legacy. As she was walking away from the hospital, she couldn't help but think of who put her there in the first place. Naruto, you'll pay for what you did to me. She thought venomously. She couldn't believe that he had actually hurt her that badly. After she got home and settled back in, she was going to scour the village up and down in search of him. She was going to find him, and she would make sure Naruto paid dearly for what he stole from her. As Naomi walked through the village on her way home, the signs that her father told her about were plainly visible on several businesses, including her favorite ramen stand. The signs that read, "This establishment does not serve Namikaze scum." It angered and hurt her to see these signs posted, and it bothered her even more to see people that used to smile at her now glaring at her as though she was the carrier of some kind of horrible plague. When she finally got to her house, she opened the front door of the Namikaze estate and yelled, "I'm home." She received no answer. Her father was likely still at the office, and her mother hadn't talked to her since she'd disowned her. Her father did confirm that her mother left him and was no longer living with them, so she didn't expect her to be there. She still hoped that her mother would come by and maybe try to talk to her again. She missed her mother, after all. Thoughts of her mother always brought thoughts of her brother, which would do nothing but infuriate her, so she suppressed those thoughts as quickly as they came. Training always made her feel better, and 6 months of inactivity in a hospital room would certainly have affected her physical condition. She had a lot of lost ground to recover, and had to get back into the shape she was in before Naruto hospitalized her. Shaking her head to rid herself of that train of thought, she simply made a beeline to the training grounds on the estate and started warming her body up. A few hours later, Naomi was still training when she heard something move towards her location. She looked behind her to see Jiraiya being wheeled towards her by a nurse. As she took in his appearance, she noticed that he had a broken arm and his entire lower body was in a cast. "Arrow Senin, what happened to you?" she asked, having never seen him like this before. As Jiraiya heard his favorite godchild ask the question, he began to think back as to how he had gotten in this position in the first place. Flashback no jutsu. It had been almost 2 weeks since Naomi had been admitted to the hospital, just a few days after Kushina had been admitted and released. Jiraiya had been visiting Naomi constantly during her hospital stay, worried over her because of the damage Naruto had done. Jiraiya was currently heading to the hospital to see his goddaughter when he suddenly saw his teammate, Tsunade. "Jiraiya, we need to tea," Tsunade spoke, needing to talk to Jiraiya about their neglect of Naruto. After a few minutes, Tsunade noticed that Jiraiya wasn't listening to her and had his eyes glued to her chest. She developed a tick mark on her forehead, and bopped him on the head to get his attention. "Jiraiya, pay attention. We need to figure out what we're going to do in order to find Naruto," she yelled out, finally getting his attention by saying Naruto's name. "Naruto. Why should we worry about him? He isn't our problem anymore. What we should worry about is the damage that he did to Naomi and how much it's going to set her training back, he said almost reprovingly, as though Tsunade knew better and needed to get her priorities straight, not even caring about the fact that Naruto was missing. Tsunade couldn't believe what she just heard as she just heard, and her response clearly showed her surprise. But Jiraiya, we need to find Naruto so we can make up for our neglect of him. HMPF. Jiraiya snorted. Naruto doesn't matter. He never did. Naomi's the child of prophecy, Tsunade. She needs our help and our training. This was something decided on by both Minato and me the day they were born. That means that Naruto had to be pushed off to the side, but it's not as if any of that matters anymore, Jiraiya told her, again with that condescending tone of reproval. Naruto is no longer part of my student's family, therefore none of my concern. And frankly, he's none of yours, either, now, so just forget about him. As Tsunade listened to what Jiraiya was saying, she began to get extremely angry. She walked closer to Jiraiya with an emotionless expression, while saying nothing. Jiraiya couldn't sense anything from her, which meant that she was suppressing her killing intent greatly. That was never a good sign for him. Tsunade, Jiraiya began nervously as he raised his hands in a defensive posture. What do you think you're doing? Who? Me? She asked innocently. Oh, I'm not doing anything, she began, before looking into his eyes with the iciest glare she'd ever given him. She suddenly grabbed his forearm before he could react, and finished her sentiment, that you don't deserve for being so malicious towards an innocent little boy. As she finished speaking, she tightened her grip on his forearm and, using her immense strength, crushed the bones, grinding them into powder. Arg! Jiraiya screamed in utter agony. Tsunade then slammed him on the ground and pinned him in place with her foot on his chest before ripping off his pants and underwear. She then grabbed his member and began to notice its sudden growth. She looked him dead in the eye again and gave him the most sadistic smile he had ever seen on her face. Even if Naomi is a spoiled rotten little brat, I'm not a monster like you or that bastard who wears the Hokage's hat, so I won't harm a child. But since I won't hurt Naomi, I'll just have to take what you care about most besides your precious prophecy, she says sadistically, as she used her knowledge of medical ninjutsu to permanently sever the blood flow to his member. She then took it a step further and, while holding on to his now permanently limp member, brought her empty fist down upon his balls, crushing them. As bad as his screams were when Tsunade broke his arm, the screams that he let out from the systematic destruction of his manly parts was 100 times worse. It was too bad for Jiraiya that she didn't end it there. Tsunade started to beat the self-proclaimed super pervert like an overly dirty throw rug. As Jiraiya looked into her face, he saw that her anger was being fueled by bloodlust. The last time she had that look in her eyes was when she caught me peeping on her. Does that worthless brat mean that much to her that she means to maybe kill me over all this? He thought to himself in utter terror. No part of his body was safe. She beat him for half an hour without stopping, breaking most of the bones in his body while turning much of his insides into paste. At least when she'd beat him for peeping on her, she'd had enough sense to know that she'd gone too far, and she stopped when she saw the condition that she'd put him in. This time, she didn't stop until she just got tired. You deserve to die for what you and that evil monster did to poor Naruto. If I ever see you anywhere near me, or Kushina or Shizune or Mikoto or Naruto or anyone else that I care for ever again, she grabbed his throat and started to squeeze, causing him to choke and gag. I'll kill you. Do you understand? All he could do was nod, as he knew she was serious. His relationship with Tsunade was all but destroyed now. There was no way he'd ever be able to salvage it. He was no longer an annoying but endearing person to her. That look in her eyes said it all. He was her enemy now. and she wouldn't hesitate to make good on her warning if he should ever cross her again. The people who were in the area when this happened were extremely disturbed. All of the men visibly paled, many of them having publicly expressed antagonistic feelings towards Naruto, but those that didn't paled simply because of what Tsunade had done to Jiraiya's manhood. All of the women there covered their children's eyes, though those who hated Naruto also feared for their own safety and vowed never to voice their negative opinions of Naruto. Who held no ill feeling towards Naruto cheered unashamedly for Tsunade, knowing not only her teammate's reputation as the world's biggest super pervert, but also for the fact that someone was finally giving the poor boy some vindication and justice. Kai, I don't want to talk about it, so what we are going to do instead is get you back to training, said Jiraiya, as he tried to steer the conversation in a different direction. Luckily for him, it worked, seeing as how Naomi started bouncing in place, ecstatic for more training. Since your father is busy in his office, I'll be the one to train you. Okay, what we're going to do is train your chakra control so I can teach you your father's techniques, and then we're going to the Hidden Toad Village to train in Senjutsu. And so began Naomi's training under a broken man. Naruto had done a lot in the past year. He perfected his sword techniques, gained an ally in Vegeta, and performed 2 major missions that gained him more allies in the span of the last 6 months. Naruto met 2 women, one in 2 missions that he had done in the last 6 months. Their names were Shion and Koyuki. Both were very beautiful. Naruto was currently in a hot spring trying to relax the sword joints and muscles that he obtained after performing so many stressful missions back to back. He had just fully relaxed when he heard a familiar voice. Well, I'll be. Of all the spots to run into you, Naruto, I never thought that I'd run into you here. And damn if you haven't gotten a good bit taller in this past year, too, said the voice that sounded surprised and happy. Naruto quickly turned around to see Asuma Sarutobi, and couldn't help the smile that crossed his face. Asuma. Hey, man, it's great to see ya. What are you doing here? Asked Naruto, wondering why his friend was here. Well, I decided to rest my joints from another mission the Hokage sent me on, he replied as he lowered himself into the hot water about 10 feet or so from where Naruto was sitting. He sighed in relief as he sat, the tension fading from his body as the hot spring worked its magic on his tired body. Really? Same here, about the missions. I mean, Naruto said, agreeing with the mission part. So, what's been going on in Konoha since I left? More than you could possibly guess, Asuma responded before he proceeded to tell Naruto everything. His mother's and Tsunade's worry for him and their realization of how they had both wronged him with their neglect, which surprised him greatly, Kushina's leaving Minato and essentially disowning Naomi due to her feelings towards Naruto, which surprised him even more, and Asuma's plan to give Konoha the Hokage it deserved. Naruto asked Asuma for a small favor concerning his plan for Konoha. Do you think you can hold off on putting the main part of your plan into action until the Chunin exams are held there again? Yeah, I guess I could, but why? Asuma replied, curious as to what his friend was thinking. I was wondering if you could get the Fire Daimyo present for the exams so you can expose the Hokage in front of him, and arrange to have some Yamanaka clan members there to scan his mind for treachery. Replies Naruto. Asuma nods his head with a smile. I like the way you think, kiddo. After an hour or so of the two of them relaxing in the hot spring and catching each other up about the goings-on in each other's lives, they stepped out of the bath and returned to the locker room to dry off and get dressed before going their separate ways. Once they exited the bathhouse, Asuma stopped Naruto. Naruto, before we go our separate ways, there is something I want to talk to you about. Yeah, what is it? Replied Naruto, who was curious to what Asuma was going to say. I was wondering if you would want to sign the monkey contract. Asuma asked Naruto, who had a look of shock on his face. Asuma answered the question that was written all over the boy's face, for 3 reasons. 1. You are my friend and you have a lot of potential waiting to be unleashed. 2. I believe that you and the monkeys will get along fine and work as a cohesive unit. 3. It would make our communication between each other much more effective. Not knowing what to say, Naruto simply replied, "Thank you, Asuma." Asuma nodded his head in acknowledgement of Naruto's gratitude. Naruto learned the hand signs and summoned Enma on his first try. In roughly an hour, he gained Enma's blessing to summon him and his clan after passing his test. Once Enma dismissed himself, Asuma stopped Naruto once more. "Last thing, kid, I promise. I want to ask a favor of you." Hearing the seriousness in Asuma's tone, Naruto knew that Asuma was about to ask him something that he wouldn't be asking lightly, and it would probably be something that Naruto might have to think long and hard about. "Okay. What favor?" Naruto responded, narrowing his eyes in attention towards his friend. "Your mother's been desperately trying to find you ever since you left Konoha. I didn't tell you this the first time, but the first time she searched for you, she nearly died from exhausting herself in her efforts. If it wasn't for Tsunade helping her to plan a more organized search, she would have likely gone back out again and done the same thing." Naruto's eyes went wide at this news, not understanding why his mother cared so much for him after kicking him out of their family. Asuma continued, "Literally everything she's done since then has been with one goal in mind: finding you and bringing you into a home where you would be loved as you deserve to be. She's realized her wrongs towards you, and she's made no excuses for them. What was worse about it is that the events were covered up and twisted in such a way that even when she did try to find evidence that people were lying about you, the evidence always spoke to the contrary. It was set up that she would believe these lies about you and give up. She was betrayed just like you were." Naruto looked very conflicted at this news. On the one hand, he somehow wanted to believe it, but on the other, it had been his rage over his mother's treatment of him that he had to use to drive himself towards becoming a Super Saiyan. Granted, that had made it a blessing of sorts, but the fact that she had driven him that far into rage, he just didn't know what to feel about this information. He certainly didn't know what to do with it. Asuma, after allowing Naruto a few moments to digest the news, then asked him, "Is it okay with you if I let her know that I've found you, and that you're okay?" Naruto snapped his gaze up at that. This was the last thing he expected Asuma to ask of him, but Asuma had done a lot for him, especially with letting him become a monkey summoner. The least he could do is let him do this. He had to have a reason. Asuma, seeing that he wasn't convinced, gave him a little more. "To let you know, Naruto, Kushina's been one of my trainers to help me get my skills and power to cage level. Again, her central goal in this is to make the village better for you. You're all she cares about, literally. Nothing else even matters to her. What do you say?" Naruto closed his eyes and sighed resignedly before nodding slowly. "Okay. That's fine. You can tell her. I guess you can." He smiled sadly and somewhat bitterly. "Even tell her and Tsunade that if they have anything they want to say to me, they can write to me, and I guess we can use the contract to send messages like that back and forth as well." He opened his eyes and looked at his friend, shedding a single tear. The idea of talking to them, to Kushina, especially, angers me and even frightens me a little, but I trust you. And if you say that things will be different with them, I know I can at least take your word for it. "Thank, buddy," Asuma said with a smile. "That'll mean more to her than you could possibly know." Asuma grabbed Naruto into a firm, brotherly hug, Naruto not hesitating to return the gesture. "I'll be in contact in a few days, okay?" Asuma offered as he left Naruto's company. "I'll be waiting for it." Naruto shouted back as Asuma got farther away. Naruto then left in a completely different direction than Asuma was heading in. And with Naruto's signing of the monkey contract, as well as giving the people who cared for him the means through which they could communicate, the fall of Minato Namikaze of Konoha began.